Welcome to the Origins Science Scholars Program of the Institute for the Science of Origins. The Institute is a partnership of Case Western Reserve University, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and IdeaStream. The Fall 2014 Origins Science Scholars Lectures are presented with the assistance of the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program, the College of Arts and Sciences, and MediaVision. Tonight we are pleased to be here at the Tinkham-Veal University Center on the campus of Case Western Reserve University for Looking for Planets, Looking for Life, and I am pleased to be tonight's speaker. Besides directing the Institute for the Science of Origins, I'm also a professor of physics and of astronomy in Case Western Reserve University's College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm pleased to direct their Joint Center for Education and Research in Cosmology and Astrophysics. So I'd like to, as I said, we're going to be talking about looking for planets and looking for life. And when I say that, I know probably people think that eventually what we're trying to do is see this guy. And we're not going to talk about that tonight. We're not going to talk about the search for intelligent life. We're just going to talk about search for life. Search for intelligent life is a different topic all to itself. And we'll do that one day. Okay. So what I'd like to start with is planets and how we found them. And then after the break, we'll talk about life and how we might recognize it. And finally, in part 3, life on other planets and how we can look for it. So let's start. So planets and how we found them. So we've actually known, or thought we've known, that there must be planets around other than the ones that we see in our solar system for a long time. This fellow knew it for sure, Democritus. He said, there are innumerable worlds of different sizes. In some, there is neither sun nor moon. In others, they are larger than ours, and others have more than one. These worlds are at irregular distances, and some are flourishing, others declining. Some of the worlds have no animal or vegetable life, nor any water. Now, I'm not quite sure how he knew that, but he was quite confident back in the day before science required experiments and observation. I like this picture of him much better, although I'm sure neither of them have anything to do with what he really looked like. So a couple of hundred years later, this fellow was equally convinced. This is Giordano Bruno, and he said, in space there are countless constellations, suns and planets. We see only the suns because they give light. The planets remain invisible, for they are small and dark. There are also numberless Earths circling around their suns. Well, he at least seemed to have got it pretty much right, and that's what we'll be talking about that. Now, he, if you don't know Giordano Bruno, he wrote this in this book called About Infinite Universes and Worlds. He was also the last person burned by the Inquisition in Rome in February of 1600. Okay. So when I was just finishing off my undergraduate work in about 1984, this was all of the planets that we knew about, right? And I'm sure you all know them, and I left Pluto up there following our speaker last week. So most, the first few, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the Earth, which is out of order, Jupiter and Saturn, were known for a very, very long time. And the others were discovered, Uranus in 1781 by Sir William Herschel, Neptune in 1846, Pluto just in 1930. So we haven't even known about Pluto for 100 years. Actually, we've known about an even larger body, the largest asteroid, Ceres, we've known since 1801. It was a very interesting story. It was discovered by Giuseppe Piazzi in January, on New Year's Day of 1801. And then it went behind, too close to the sun, and he lost it. And it was rediscovered in a position predicted by a fellow named Carl Friedrich Gauss, who was a very famous mathematician. He, in fact, basically became a very famous mathematician in part because of this, and was the inventor of modern algebra. So he was able to predict the orbits of the planets from a small number of observations that Piazzi had taken. So how do we go about looking for planets around other stars? Well, the first and a very important observation is that those planets will be orbiting those stars. So the first thing you should do is you should look near stars. Now, it's important not just to look near stars, but in fact to look at the stars. So far, the way we've found planets, for the most part, is not by seeing the planets, but by looking at what they do to the stars. And the thing that those planets do is they actually make the stars wobble. So we think of the Earth and all the planets of our solar system as going around the sun, and the sun sitting still. It doesn't. Okay? In particular, Jupiter is large enough that it makes the sun wobble by about its size. So the sun goes around a point, okay, about its radius away from its center. So the sun is not sitting still. Okay? It's going around a point called the barycenter, or the center of mass of the solar system. So planets make stars wobble. And it's the wobble, looking for the wobble, that was the first way that we were able to look for planets and find them around other stars. So if we can see this from, if it's above, we would be able to see maybe see the planet wobble. That actually, the star wobble, that turns out to be very hard. It's easier if the star is moving towards and away from you, as it is in this right-hand picture. So on the left, the star is kind of wobbling around. That's really hard because we don't resolve the stars generally. But if the planet's in a plane with the star, then the star will be coming towards you and away from you. Okay? And we're able to measure the speed at which a star is moving towards or away from us. So if a planet makes a star wobble, it means it makes it move towards and away from us. Then when it's moving towards us, the light from the star will appear a little bit bluer. When it's moving away from us, it'll appear a little bit redder. That's called the Doppler effect. Okay? And so one can try to look for that. The first star that people tried to look for it on is this star called Gamma Cephei, which is right near Polaris, not very far away, between Polaris and Cassiopeia, if you know the night sky at all, which I don't. But it's a relatively ordinary star. Actually, it's a double star. And this fellow up in Canada, up in Victoria, named Bruce Campbell, at the Department of Physics and Astronomy of the University of Victoria, he was actually a graduate student at the time, thought that maybe he could measure this radial motion of a star. And so he developed a technique to do very high precision Doppler measurements of the spectrum of the star, and be able to look for this repetitive in and out motion of the star. And this isn't him. I couldn't find any pictures of him because after he did this, and he managed. This is not no one. This is his supervisor, Professor Walker, who is at the University of British Columbia, and the two of them, together with Professor Yang, they went and made these measurements, and they found a planet around that star, around Gamma Cephei. Okay. And a couple of years, very soon after that, someone else found a planet, and then someone else didn't. They looked and didn't find it, and so it got cast into doubt. And in fact, it was so devastating, and it made it impossible for Dr. Campbell to get a job, and he left the field, and he stopped doing science. And then, a number of years later, you'll notice, so that was back in 1988, August of 1988 was the original paper claiming the discovery of a planet. And it was only in 2003 that people went back and looked at that, and they in fact confirmed that, that there was a planet there. And you'll notice that he was now working at BTEC Enterprise Limited, which was not a place where he was doing astronomy. He had left the field. So that was the first planet found around another star. Okay. And often forgotten, but we'll talk in a minute about some of the other people who use this technique, and they acknowledge that they did in fact get this technique from Campbell. So here is an artist's conception of that planet. I can't show you a picture because we don't have good pictures of other planets. Not yet. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we may. But so far, all we have are artist conceptions. So if you ever see pictures of beautiful pictures of planets showing red streaks on them, you know that's just what an artist it's an artist's drawing. Okay, so what's happened since then, since 1988? Well, there was a lot of activity, mostly driven by this set of people. So on the left, you see Michel Mayor and Didier Queloz, who are at the Observatoire de Genève, the Observatory of Geneva, and they started using this technique, and they found in 1995, so 7 years later, they found the first confirmed extrasolar planet orbiting a sun-like star called 51 Pegasus. Okay. And this group on the right, in particular the two top ones, Jeff Marcy and Paul Butler, they started using this technique, and they found 70 of the first 100 extrasolar planets, along with various collaborators, including Deborah Fisher and Steve Vogt in particular. Okay. So we went from having just the planets that we all learned, right, in school, to having, over the course of a small amount of time, by the mid-2000s, we had hundreds of planets already. So we were starting to first, discover them at the rate of a few a year, and by 2007, we were discovering, 60 a year. Now, the next graph shows the same thing, planets being discovered year by year, but you'll notice this huge change in the colors in which the number of planets here. So this is, for each year, the number of planets being discovered, and you notice the scale is different. We go from discovering a few a year to discovering, all of a sudden, hundreds and hundreds. And also you notice that instead of it being in blue, it's in green. Okay. Well, what happened? What happened is that we changed techniques. Okay. So all of those blue ones, those initial set, those were discovered using this technique of watching the wobble of the star, looking for the radial velocity of the star as planets go around. And you were even able to see if there was more than one planet, the kind of the dance the star would do would be a little bit complicated. And then we started to use a technique called transits. And a transit is that a planet is passing in front of a star. So the planet is orbiting the star and then crosses in front of the star, and the light from the star gets dimmer. Now, if you see a star get dimmer, you might not immediately suspect that there's a planet. But if this happens over and over again over the course of several years at regular intervals, then you realize what's happening is that the planet is going around the star, and every time it crosses the star gets dimmer. This is very difficult to measure because the planets, this is a large, showing a very large planet in front of the star. If the Earth does it in front of the sun, it's only about much less than a 1% decline, about a 1 in a million, a 1 in 10,000 decline. So people started to be able to do this from the ground, but they wanted to see lots more of them. So the French put up a satellite called Corot, and NASA put up a satellite called Kepler. And Kepler is now, which was launched in March 2009, they are ones that are now seeing hundreds and hundreds. I think they announced 700 last February. Okay? So we now see lots and lots of planets. There are no longer 10-ish planets in our solar system, depending how you count them. There are hundreds and hundreds of planets. Many, many stars have planets. And you don't need to read the actual axes here. This is just showing how far away the planets are and how massive they are. And most of the ones we see are very massive. That's because massive ones are very good at both blocking stars and making them wobble. Most of them tend to be quite close in to the left, less than the distance of the Earth from the sun. And that's because ones that are very close in make stars wobble. How far away have we looked? Well, not very far. Okay. So this is a picture of our galaxy, and we've looked out really only to about 2,000 light years. Now compare that to the distance to the center of our galaxy, which is more like 25 to 30,000 light years, and the distance across our galaxy, which is more like a couple of 100,000 light years. Okay. So we've looked really, we don't call this quite the solar neighborhood. This is looking beyond the immediate solar neighborhood, but like kind of the solar township. Okay. So as I said, we're now starting to find all sorts of planets, including here's one called Kepler 69c, which is about 2,700 light years. And you'll see it looks just like Earth. It's around a star, very much like our suns. It has a radius about 1.5 times the radius of the Earth. And the temperature on the surface, unless some strange stuff is going on like goes on Venus, is probably about 280 to 300 degrees of above absolute zero. In other words, you could go out, with a coat on. So, or here's another one, Kepler 22b, about 620 light years away, also around a star very much like our sun, about 2.5 times the size of the Earth, and a temperature that's, somewhere between minus 11 centigrade. So it could be cold there depending on how much greenhouse effect there is. But there's probably places on this planet that have liquid water. Okay. So we've gone from having a few planets to having lots of planets, and even planets that are starting to look like the Earth, in something called the habitable zone, the place where there's liquid water, the thing that we think is essential for life.
What caused the wobbling? Was this a gravitational or a magnetic pull?
No, good question. So, right. So for example, Jupiter. Jupiter is about 1/1000th of the mass of the sun, okay? Which isn't that much, but Jupiter is going around the sun, and just like the sun is pulling on Jupiter, Jupiter is pulling on the sun, and so that makes the sun have to not stay still. As Jupiter goes around, the sun itself gets pulled by gravity out of that. If it can't just sit at the center, it too has to orbit opposite Jupiter. Okay, so imagine you had two things exactly the same mass. They would have to both go around in a circle around their center, okay, held together by gravity. As one of them gets more massive than the other, so if one of them is 1/10 the size, then all of a sudden the orbits will start to be, one will orbit close to the center between them, and one will orbit further away. In this case, Jupiter orbits quite far away from the sun, about 750 million kilometers, and the sun orbits only about, less than 1 million kilometers from its edge.
So how many habitable planets have we found?
The number of habitable planets, well, first of all, we aren't completely, it's not always, we don't actually know whether a planet is necessarily habitable, because that depends on things that we can't measure about the planet, typically. It depends on, for example, we might have thought that Venus would be habitable, but it's very, very hot. There's no liquid water on the surface because there's too much greenhouse effect. Mars almost could have been habitable if it had an atmosphere, but it has none, so it's not habitable. So where exactly you are, I think at the moment the number suspected is in the dozens. Again, it depends also on what you mean, because is a planet habitable if it's not rocky? So there are rocky planets and gas planets. So there's kind of when last I looked, as I was preparing the talk, it looked like there were at the moment kind of dozens of candidates, but that number is likely to increase a lot.
Thank you for joining us. In the first part of this talk, I've been discussing how we have discovered over 2,000 planets around stars other than our sun in just the last 25 years. For more information on the Origin Science Scholars Program, including a full video archive, please visit the Institute's website at www.case.edu/origins. In the next part of the talk, I'll discuss how we might look for life on the exoplanets that we discover. Now, back to the talk.
Part 2. So what does life look like? So you might think it looks like this, big party on the mall, a big gathering on the mall. Clearly that would be the search. If we wanted to look for that, we would look for the search for intelligent life. And we would go about that in a completely different way. We would be happy if we saw something like this, but that's hard to find. It's clearly going to be hard to see something like this, to see insects or the effects of in fact any higher level animal. We need something that's going to affect the atmosphere of the star, something that we can see from very far away. So probably the thing that we're most likely to see the effects of is the growth of plants or more primitive organisms, algae, other things that are going to change the atmospheric chemistry. But we're not going to do that unless we send a mission to the planet. We're not going to be able to, and land on it, we're not going to be able to see plants, or maybe from an orbiter. We would be lucky if we could get a view like this, but a view like this requires us to be awfully close. So we can send satellites to nearby planets and look for life. But what happens when we go further away? So for example, the Voyager satellite, which was sent out, which has actually now left the solar system, it looked back at the Earth. So we are used to seeing beautiful pictures of the Earth like the one I showed you a moment ago, okay? Thinking of the Earth as looking like that. And if we looked at something like that, we probably would be able to learn a lot about it. We'd certainly be able to learn about water on liquid oceans, and we'd be able to learn about water vapor in the atmosphere. We'd be able to learn about precipitation. If we look carefully, we would see plants, plant cover on the surface. That's a lot harder if we're far away, looking at the Earth from a distance, even like the edge of the solar system. So here is a picture of the Earth from beyond the orbit of Pluto. Now you'll see this streak. The streak is actually isn't anything. It's just some result of the optics in the telescope. So ignore the streak and just look at that tiny blue dot, that tiny little dot. That's the Earth. Now that's the Earth from just beyond Pluto. Okay. And we're going to be trying to look at the Earth from much, much farther away. Light only takes a few hours to get from here to Pluto, and it takes about 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years, to get to the nearest stars. And the stars we're talking about are going to be anywhere from tens of light years that we're going to be looking at, from tens of light years to thousands of light years. But nevertheless, people took the images, kind of asked the question, what would happen if we took the images from, say, Voyager, and we were able to do spectroscopy on that? What that means is what we do is we separate the light out into its constituent wavelengths. And when we do that, we're able to learn a lot about the light that is reflecting off the surface of the Earth. We can separate it, and we can see that each element will produce, whether it's it will produce different lines in its spectrum. So we're able to look at the atmospheres of planets near us and see what those atmospheres are made of using spectroscopy. So for example, Carl Sagan did that with the Galileo spacecraft when it was looking at the Earth. Okay? So looking at reflections of Earth light, he was able to see in the spectrum all sorts of lines that are labeled here as oxygen lines and water lines and methane lines and nitrous oxide, oxides of nitrogen, ozone. All of these things are indications of life. So the amount of oxygen in our atmosphere is there, the fact that there's free oxygen in our atmosphere is there only because of life. So if we see a planet that has lots and lots of oxygen and lots of methane, CH4, those are indications of life. So he was able to conclude that by looking from the Galileo spacecraft, he writes, from the Galileo flyby, an observer otherwise unfamiliar with the Earth would be able to draw the following conclusions. The planet is covered with large amounts of water, present as vapor, snow, and ice, and as oceans. If any biota exists, it is plausibly water-based. There is so much oxygen in the atmosphere as to cast doubt on the proposition that it was obtained from the photodissociation of water vapor and the escape of hydrogen. An alternative explanation is biologically mediated photodissociation of water by visible light as the first step in photosynthesis. An unusual red-absorbing pigment that may serve this purpose, and he's talking about,
chlorophyll, thank you, corresponding to no plausible mineral is found widely on land. Methane is detected at 1 part per million, some 140 orders of magnitude higher than equilibrium value in this oxygen-rich atmosphere. Only biological processes are likely to generate so large a disparity. But how plausible a world covered with carbon-fixing photosynthetic organisms using water as an electron donor and generating a massive and poisonous oxygen atmosphere might be to observers from a different world is an open question. So in other words, looking from outside the Earth, back at the Earth, Sagan and his colleagues were able to deduce that there was life on Earth. Okay. They deduced that because there was so much oxygen, and it's very hard to get that much oxygen just from sunlight, from the ultraviolet light from the sun, breaking apart water molecules. They were able to deduce that from the fact that there's so much methane, which should be reacting much too fast with the oxygen to be in the atmosphere at the level it is. And they were able to deduce that from the presence of some sort of substance that was absorbing light in a way that no known mineral was. But as they said, it's not clear that someone who wasn't already well versed in the biology of Earth would have come to the same conclusions. So we have to understand that our search for life on other planets is going to be what's called doing science under the lamppost. We're going to look for ourselves. Okay? So we're going to look for life that looks very much like us. And if life doesn't look very much like us, we're going to have a much harder time finding it. So, translation, by looking at the Earth from space and noticing the presence of oxygen with methane and chlorophyll, you could learn that there must be life on Earth. Okay? And the question is, what would it take to look at exoplanets and check for life? So Sagan and his friends and his colleagues did it for an Earth that looked like this, where you could really look at the Earth and see its properties. And what we have to do is do it for this. Well, if we did it for this, that's not good enough. We really have to do it for something that's much, 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 much farther away, where we can't possibly resolve the blue dot. So that's our challenge. And after the break, I'll tell you a little bit about how we're looking towards meeting that challenge.
Are your instruments better now, and that's what's allowing you to look farther away?
The truth is, so far our instruments aren't better, but we believe we know how to build instruments that could be better. And you'll see, I will show you 3 classes of instruments that people are considering or have considered over the last kind of decade or so that would, we believe, allow us to look at the Earth around the sun out to maybe 30 or 40 or 50 light years and be able to measure the atmosphere well enough to characterize it, to be able to see these what are called biomarkers like ozone and methane and oxygen.
Are any of these planets viewed with binary stars?
Yes, some of the planets are around binary stars. Typically, these are wide enough binaries, and the planets are much closer to one of the stars than the companion star is. So you'll have 2 widely spaced binaries and a planet going around one of the stars. That's the typical. Now, it is possible in principle to get planets much farther out of a binary, but those I don't believe we've seen any of those, but I may be wrong. But they're certainly not expected in anything like the same number.
Going back to your the location of the Earth,
right.
if it were where Jupiter is now,
right?
You did say that we couldn't live on that planet there.
Well, it'd be very cold, right? It would be much too cold.
But you said that the gravity was 25 times less than, which means we'd be floating around in space somewhere.
So the gravity of the Earth is entirely due to the Earth. The gravity that you and I are feeling today, we can't feel the gravity from the moon or the sun. We feel the gravity of the Earth. Okay. But then what's holding the Earth in orbit around the sun is the pull of the sun on the Earth. Okay. So that keeps the Earth going around the sun in a year. You move that out to Jupiter, and the gravity has gotten 25 times weaker. Okay, of the sun pulling on the Earth. You and I still wouldn't notice it. you know, the length of the year would just be the length of the Jupiter's year, which is what, about 25 years, if I remember correctly?
No, but I mean,
think I'm wrong.
There's also, you've heard of the Goldilocks theory, not too hot, not too cold, and just in the right place. If the planet Earth was further away from any star or from any habitable planet, we couldn't live there.
Right. So if the Earth was much farther away from the sun or for any star, right, then it would be too cold for us to live there because there'd be no liquid water. We depend on liquid water. If it was too close in, then we couldn't live there because there'd be no liquid water. All the water would evaporate.
So when you do look, my last question, when you do look for a planet, are you looking for the same relationship that Earth has with the sun?
So we look for planets of all sorts. You know, we look for them close in, farther away, but clearly one of the targets of any planet finding program is going to be to look for planets that are in what's called this habitable zone. This zone close enough to a star that the water is liquid and not so close that it does, you know, close enough that it's not solid and far enough away that it's not, you know, that's water vapor. Okay, but there's partly that zone gets widened by the greenhouse effect. So the Earth is considerably warmer than it would be if we didn't have an atmosphere that kept us warm. Okay, so the greenhouse effect helps make that zone a little broader. Now, exactly how much greenhouse effect there is, you don't know until you look at the atmosphere of the star. So Venus has so much of a greenhouse effect that there's no liquid water on it.
With a comet planning supposedly to get near Mars in 2016, 2018, are there any plans to hitchhike on the comet and put equipment that
on that comet?
On that comet, since it's coming so close, that would allow us to...
plans for that comet. No, there have been plans to intercept comets, you know, to scoop material from comets, but I don't think that comet in particular, no.
But not to put equipment to try to get a ride on that as it rides through far space.
I don't believe anyone's... I'm sure someone's proposed it. I'm sure someone's proposed riding on, you know, landing stuff on a comet and letting it ride out. But I don't know of any mission like that that's ever been approved, or, you know, I don't know. Yeah. Good question. I have no idea. I have no idea if anyone seriously considered that. Part of it is, you see, most of the expense of getting something far out into space is spent in the first little bit. So you spend a lot of energy getting something off the surface of Earth, okay? And then you spend a lot of energy getting it away from, you know, the first, say, doubling the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So unless you find a comet that's really close by, getting it 10 times the distance from the Earth is not that much harder than getting it twice the distance from the Earth. So if you have to go to Mars, there's no real reason to piggyback on the comet, okay? So, and it's really hard to piggyback on something that's moving really fast, right? Because you don't want to smash into something because you'll break up. So piggybacking may not be as useful as one would think. I think that's probably one of the issues. Because you have to match speeds anyway. Once you've matched speeds, you know, to avoid a hard collision, you might as well go yourself. You don't need the comet anymore.
Going back to the habitable zone and comets, with these extrasolar planets, has anybody been able to nail down the orbit? If they're like nice and circular, or if they're wildly elliptical. It is possible to have a planet that may look like it's in the habitable zone, get too close to the sun or too far away. Is there anything done with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So many of what's called the eccentricities of the orbit, so how elliptical the orbits are, many of those are known. One of the things we depend on, so there are many things that we depend on Earth that seem like coincidences, or things that might be very rare that we don't really know. we have to be in the place where they're in the habitable zone where there's liquid water. And so that means we can't have an orbit that goes out of the habitable zone, right? Otherwise, all the water freezes or all the water boils, and that's probably not very good. As I think one of our speakers mentioned, we can't get struck by comets or huge asteroids very often, and that requires another planet, a bigger planet outside. So we depend on Jupiter to be like a shepherd that protects us from these large bodies that would otherwise be bombarding Earth. But that may actually not be necessary for life so much as for intelligent life. Okay? But the need to stay in the habitable zone is probably more important. So yeah, so you probably won't want very elliptical orbits. You probably want your orbits to be relatively circular. And some orbits are quite circular and some orbits are very elliptical. And so a wide range. One of the things we're learning about is that planets come in a huge number of varieties because the way in which each planetary system is formed is particular. The particular situation of how the star collapsed, what exactly went on when planets formed around that star in the circumstellar disk. There's a huge amount of variation, and so we see all sorts of different planets in all sorts of multi-planet configurations, and that's encouraging because it means that there should be some out there that have the similar properties to Earth, but we haven't found exactly the one yet. Although some of the ones I showed you are pretty close. Okay, I think I'm being waved at, which is suggesting that it's time to get back to the talk. Okay, so we've figured out that what we need to do is we need to find planets, and we've now found hundreds of planets. Finding planets is no longer a real problem. Although finding them nearby is actually harder than finding them far away because of the way that the transits work. But so we can find planets pretty well, but the next challenge is really imaging the planets and making really good measurements of the spectrum of the planets, of the wavelengths, of the intensity of the light that's coming to us from the planets, and so that we can tell whether the properties of the atmosphere of the planet and maybe even the surface of the planet.
We hope you've been enjoying the Origin Science Scholars Program. In addition to directing the Institute for the Science of Origins, I'm a professor in the departments of physics and of astronomy at Case Western Reserve University. In the second part of our talk, we learned how we could use the distinctive signature of certain molecules in the spectrum of a planet to conclude that it hosts living beings. In our final segment, I'll discuss some of the ways that we hope to go about doing that in the coming decades. Now, back to our talk.
So we want to look for life on planets, not like this, but like this, really far away, so that the planets are really just tiny dots. Okay. So what are the problems? Well, one problem is that, as I just showed you, planets are dim, and they don't shine. The light from a planet comes to us principally in two ways. They reflect light. So we see the moon. We see the moon because it reflects sunlight. If we're off the planet Earth and look back, we see the Earth because it reflects sunlight. And they also glow, but in the infrared because they're warm. Okay? So planets do glow, and they reflect light as well. So we can look for both those types of light. We can look for the visible light that is reflecting off the planet, or we can look for the infrared light that's being emitted by the planet as it glows. Actually, it wouldn't be so hard to see planets. They are dim, but they're not that dim. The bigger problem is that stars are bright. And the planets that we're interested in are near the stars. Okay? So it's kind of like driving down the road and trying to drive straight into the sun. You're trying to look at things that are near the sun. It's things that you could otherwise see if the sun wasn't there. You can't see because the sun is getting in your eyes. So the stars are bright. In the infrared, they're about 1 million times brighter than the planets, and in the visible, they're about 1 billion or 10 billion times brighter than the planet. So the sun is about 1 billion times brighter than the Earth. seen from far away. And the other thing is that the planets are very close to the stars that we want to look at. So if we were looking at the solar system from 30 light years away, a distance out to which there are a few thousand stars and maybe with planets around them, then the separation between the Earth Sun is about the same as a dime held 13 miles away. Okay? So the two are very, very close. So you have a really bright thing and a really dim thing, and they're very close to each other. And up till now, we haven't even been able to resolve the really bright thing. In other words, we don't, except for very few stars, we're not able to take pictures of stars except as points of light. Okay? So we haven't been able to resolve the star resolve the star as a disk. Okay, so in other words, we're trying to look at something like this, a star, and we need to be able to get rid of the glare in order to see the planet that I'm sure all of you noticed. Okay. So let me do that again. So here is the sun, a star, and there's a planet sitting right there, and we have to be able to see it. And I've actually come nowhere close to representing the scale of the problem. Okay. So there are three schemes to not see the star, image the planet, and examine the planet's spectrum that are being considered. Okay. And the first one, and the one that's been around probably the longest, is called a nulling interferometer. And here is an artist's conception of a nulling interferometer out in space because we haven't built one. Okay. So what you'll see here is 4 telescopes. Okay. Those 4 telescopes are each several meters across, so maybe 10 to 20 feet across. And they have to be flown in space in formation. You can't mount, it turns out you can't mount them on a big beam because the beam has to be too long. Okay. So maybe 30 meters, so 100 feet to a couple of 100 feet apart. And they have to be flown accurately to about 1 millimeter. Okay. And then what you do is instead of adding the light from them, which is what we usually do in interferometers, we subtract the light from them. And if you do that really carefully with 4 or more interferometers, you can arrange to subtract the starlight at the center of your picture and leave behind the planet light that's right nearby. Okay. So here's a place where we do this. These are the Keck interferometer up on Mauna Kea. Okay, that can be operated in a nulling mode. But we would like to do that out in space. As I said, anywhere from 3 to 6 telescopes out in space, flown 30 to 100 meters apart to accuracies of less than 1 millimeter, and then you subtract the starlight and leave the planet glow. Okay? And so there was a mission concept called Terrestrial Planet Finder 1. Okay, that's what I'm showing you. That was a NASA mission concept, and there was one called Darwin, which was a European mission concept, and TPF-1, the Terrestrial Planet Finder Interferometer, was approved in 2004 and canceled in 2011, and Darwin was studied up until 2007 and is not currently being considered. So that's one concept of how we might be able to do this. Another concept is something that we've actually used for a long time called a coronagraph. And here is an artist's conception, again, of the Terrestrial Planet Finder coronagraph sent out into space to look at planets and to look at planets around nearby stars and image them. Okay. And the way it works is that what you do is you have a big telescope out in space, and you bring the light into the telescope and you focus it down onto what's called your focal plane, like your detector inside a camera. And then what you do is once you get it there, you block the sunlight. Okay, so here is a picture taken in April 29th of 2000. And the sun is behind this disk. Okay? And you'll notice the solar corona, and that's where the name comes from, coronagraph. This was an instrument developed to study the corona of the star of the sun by a fellow named Bernard Liot, who worked at the Pic de Midi telescope in France. And you'll see something else here, which is a comet. Okay, so this was done to study that comet very near the sun. So it's a very similar problem, right? We're trying to study something relatively dim, whether it's the corona or this comet. And we do that by taking a picture and then blocking the starlight. Okay? Now, the challenge of this is that you have to block the starlight very, very, very efficiently. Because remember, if you're doing this in the visible, the planet is 10 billion times dimmer than the star. If you're doing it in the infrared, it's only 1 million times dimmer than the star. And that means that you have to be very careful about letting any stray starlight leak out of the part of the picture that you want, that you're into the part of the picture where your planet is. Okay? So you have to polish your mirrors very, very, very well and make sure that all of the optical elements in your telescope are incredibly good. In fact, you have to polish your mirror to about 1/3000th of a wavelength. Okay? So it's a very tough problem. And people have worked for a long time on the TPF coronagraph, and it too was approved in 2004, and it too was canceled in 2011. So the current status is that all 3 of these missions, TPF interferometer, Darwin, which was a European version of that, and TPF coronagraph are what we call no-go, which means at the moment they are not being pushed forward. And the concept that is being pushed forward is one that a lot of the work was done originally here back in the late 90s and early 2000s for an occulter. And here, actually, the solution is much more familiar to you. So if you're driving down the road and the sun's in your face, like this light's in my eye, what do? You do this. Right? You put down your sunshade, or you put your hand in front of the light. Okay? So instead of bringing all the starlight into the telescope, bring it to a focus, and then trying to mess with things once they've gotten into your telescope already, what you do is you build a space telescope and you put some sort of star shade in front of the star so that it blocks the star and not the planet. Now, that sounds easier said. That's easier said than done. And that's because the telescope has to be pretty big, about at least 4 meters, maybe 6 meters. So 4 meters is about 12 feet, 6 meters is about 18 or 19 feet. So that means that the occulter, this opaque thing that's going to block the starlight, has to be at least that big. But if you put that right in front of your telescope, you're going to block the planet as well. So you have to put it far enough away that it's like that dime at 13 miles. Okay, well, it's not a dime. Instead, it's the size of your telescope. So instead of putting it 13 miles away, you have to put it more like 20,000 miles away. Okay? So what you do is you build a space telescope, kind of like the Hubble, but bigger. Okay? And you put it about 1.5 million kilometers from the Earth out. Or maybe you put it in an Earth trailing orbit. And then you fly one or a fleet of these occulters in front of the telescopes, and you bring them to the point where they are right in front of the star. And it looks like you could probably do this. Now, in fact, the challenge is less controlling these occulters, controlling these satellites, these star shades, than actually getting them to block the light well enough. Because you may think that the thing to do is to have a really nice opaque shade, something that blocks the light. But actually, opaque things turn out to not block light very well. Okay? They block most of the light, but remember, we have to block essentially all of the light. We can't let any of the light get by. And if to do that, you can't have sharp edges on your occulter. You have to have
edges that go, so the occulter has to be opaque at the center and slowly transition to transparent. Okay? And that turns out to be the biggest, what they call in NASA speak, the tall tent pole. Okay? And so the solution that was devised is to make something that actually looks like a giant flower with many petals. Okay? So this is opaque at the center, and it transitions to being transparent in the sense that the light can go through some places, and as the farther you go out, the less of the light is blocked. And that turns out to behave just like going from solid, from opaque, to transparent over the radius of the telescope. So you put that out about 37,000 kilometers, about 2,200, 2,300, 22,000, 23,000 miles in front of your telescope, and you're able to block the light from the telescope, from the star. So this is called exoplanet star shade. And I'd like to show you some simulations of what a star shade like that can do and why it's so interesting. So here is a picture of the sun taken from a 6-meter telescope, so a pretty large telescope, about the biggest we can put in space, integrating, and I was looking at a very long exposure, several hours, and you'll notice all sorts of rings around that. We're being very, very careful to model exactly what happens when the light comes into the telescope and gets bent a little because the light is a wave. Okay? So we get these ringing patterns. Now, the ringing patterns are very, very well described by the light. We've allowed so much light in there that the ringing patterns are beautifully, beautifully etched out. And so we can actually subtract that pattern and be left with just what's called the noise in that starlight. Now, you can try to look for the planets. So we've subtracted the starlight, but we've done this without putting the occulter there. We've just used a really good model of how the telescope works. And if you can see a planet in there, I congratulate you, because I can't. But if we put a star shade in front of the planet, that's what we see. Okay? And you can already see very quickly that, and that, and that, and that, and I believe that. And those are, well, Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, Earth, and just a hint of Mars. So this is looking at our solar system from 30 light years away. And then if we can do that, then we can start looking at each of those planets, and we can start doing spectroscopy of their atmospheres and looking for these biomarkers like oxygen and water. That's under development. In the meantime, people are going to send up a new telescope to do more and more of these transits. Right now, there's one up there called Kepler. This is called TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, and it will look at over 100,000 nearby stars. People are talking about sending up a fleet of nanosatellites. Each one's just about this big. Each one would just model one bright star. But I think it's fair to say that if we're willing to pay for it, then over the next 20 years, we will be able to look at certainly tens of planets, to look at their atmospheres, tens of Earth-like planets, to look at their atmospheres and to tell whether there's life on those planets. And there's two possibilities: that either we are alone in the universe, or we'll discover that we're not alone, and probably both are equally terrifying. Thank you.
This lecture is part of the Origins Science Scholars Program of the Institute for the Science of Origins. The Institute is a partnership of Case Western Reserve University, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and IdeaStream. The Fall 2014 Origins Science Scholars Lectures are presented with the assistance of the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program, the College of Arts and Sciences, and MediaVision. For more information on the Origins Science Scholars Program, including a full video archive, please visit the Institute's website at www.case.edu/origins.